The council chamber of the Black Serpent clan had never known such fury, Commander. Sithara stood at the center of the obsidian floor, her scales gleaming like polished night under the crimson lights that hung from the vaulted ceiling above. And every muscle in her serpentine body trembled with a rage that threatened to consume her entirely. The elders watched from their elevated platforms, their ancient eyes reflecting the same cold anger that burned in her heart. And not one of them spoke as she delivered her report in a voice that cut through the silence like a blade. 3 days ago, a human freighter departed from Trading Station Omega-7, she said, her forked tongue flickering with each word. And when our guards discovered the theft, the ship had already jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished into the void between stars. Elder Vasek, the oldest of them all, leaned forward on his coiled body and asked the question that everyone already knew the answer to. What did they take, Commander? Sithara felt her venom glands pulse with toxic fury as she answered, the sacred warming chamber. Elder, the one containing the 47 eggs of the blessed clutch, the largest and most precious clutch our clan has produced in over 200 years. A hiss of outrage swept through the chamber like a wave of pure hatred. And even the guards stationed at the doors shifted their weapons in response to the collective fury that filled the air. These were not ordinary eggs. The blessed clutch represented the future of the Black Serpent clan, the children of their strongest warriors and wisest leaders, carefully bred and protected according to traditions that stretch back thousands of years to the volcanic homeworld where their species had first emerged from the hot stones. Every Black Serpent knew that eggs required precise temperature control, exact humidity levels, and constant monitoring by trained caretakers who understood the ancient arts of clutch keeping. Without these things, the eggs would die within hours, their delicate embryos freezing or overheating or simply fading away in the cold darkness of space. The humans claim it was a mistake. Sithara continued, her voice dripping with contempt for the very idea. They say their captain purchased a cargo container legally from a merchant who had no right to sell it, and they insist they had no knowledge of what was inside. Lies, hissed Elder Korath, her scarred scales rippling with disgust. Humans always lie. They are a species of deceivers and thieves who care nothing for honor or sacred bonds. Sithara had to agree with the assessment. She had encountered humans before during her years of military service, and she had learned to despise their soft bodies, and their weak limbs and their strange, flat faces that showed every emotion like open books. They were not warriors. They were not predators. They were prey animals who had somehow stumbled into the stars and spread across the galaxy like a plague of vermin, building their colonies and their trade routes and their pathetic little civilizations on worlds that real species had ignored, and now they had taken. The most precious treasure her clan possessed. I have traced the freighter's course, Sithara announced, projecting a star map into the air above the council floor with a flick of her wrist. The ship traveled to a human colony world called New Helsinki in the Outer Rim territories, and our intelligence indicates that the captain sold the cargo container to a local resident before departing for parts unknown. Then we must go to this world and retrieve what belongs to us, Elder Vasek said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. And we must punish those responsible for this crime against our people. Sithara bowed her head in acknowledgement of the command she had been waiting for. I have already assembled a strike force. Elder 60 of our finest warriors, each one trained in the arts of combat and infiltration and vengeance. And our ship is ready to depart within the hour. 60 warriors for one human world? Elder Korath asked with something like amusement in her ancient voice. Is that not excessive, Commander? I wish to send a message, Sithara replied, and the cold certainty in her words silenced any further questions. When we are finished with New Helsinki, every species in the galaxy will remember what happens to those who wronged it. Black Serpent Clan. The council gave their blessing, and Sithara left the chamber. With her heart burning and her mind focused on a single purpose, she would find the eggs. She would save them if they could still be saved, and she would make the humans pay for what they had done. The warship Venomous Shadow cut through the void like a blade through flesh, its dark hull absorbing light and sensor signals alike as it traveled toward the outer rim at speeds that would have torn lesser vessels apart inside the ship. Sithara gathered her warriors in the main briefing chamber and laid out her plan for the assault on New Helsinki. "The colony is small," she explained, gesturing at the tactical display that floated before them. "Perhaps 10,000 humans living in scattered settlements across the planet's surface, with no significant military presence and no defenses capable of stopping our approach. What kind of world is it?" asked Lieutenant Kessex, her second-in-command and the deadliest warrior in the strike force. "Cold," Sithara answered, and she saw the displeasure ripple through her troops at the single word. The humans chose to settle on a frozen world covered in ice and snow, where temperatures drop far below what our bodies can tolerate without artificial heating. This was bad news for a cold-blooded species. The Black Serpents had evolved on a volcanic world where the ground itself provided warmth, and their metabolism depended on external heat sources to function properly. In cold environments, their movements slowed, their reflexes dulled, and their strength faded like water evaporating under a harsh sun. "We will wear full thermal suits," Sithara continued, anticipating their concerns, "and we will strike quickly before the cold can affect us. Our target is a single dwelling on the edge of the settlement, belonging to a human farmer who purchased the cargo container from the freighter captain." "A farmer?" Kessex asked with disbelief. "Our sacred eggs were sold to a farmer?" "The captain apparently wanted quick payment and did not care who bought his stolen goods," Sithara replied, her venom glands pulsing again at the casual disrespect shown to her people's most treasured possessions. "But this farmer will learn that some things have prices that cannot be paid in credits." The warriors hissed their approval, their fangs gleaming in the low light of the briefing chamber. They had been chosen for this mission because they were the best of the best, the elite of the Black Serpent clan, and they had never failed in any task assigned to them tonight. They would remind the galaxy why their clan was feared tonight. They would bring their children home, and tonight the snow of New Helsinki would run red with human blood. Sithara dismissed her troops to prepare their weapons and their suits, and she retired to her private quarters to meditate on the battle to come. She thought about the eggs, alone and cold in some alien dwelling, and she prayed to the ancient spirits of her ancestors that they might still live. She thought about the human farmer who had bought them like common cargo, and she imagined the terror in his eyes when her warriors came for him, and she thought about the message she would send to the rest of the galaxy when this mission was complete. The Black Serpent clan did not forgive. The Black Serpent clan did not forget, and the Black Serpent clan always collected what was owed to them. The planet New Helsinki hung in the void like a ball of frozen death, its surface covered in endless sheets of white ice and gray snow that stretched from pole to pole without mercy or warmth. "Commander," Sithara watched the world grow larger through the viewport of the Venomous Shadow and felt her scales tighten against her body in an instinctive response to the cold that awaited her below. "Initiating atmospheric entry," reported the pilot, her clawed hands moving across the control surfaces with practiced precision. "We will reach the target coordinates in approximately 15 standard minutes." Sithara nodded and turned away from the viewport to address her warriors one final time. They stood in perfect formation in the landing bay, their thermal suits sealed tight against the hostile environment they were about to enter, and their weapons gleamed with deadly promise under the ship's interior lights. "Remember your training," Sithara commanded, her voice carrying easily through the tense silence. "We move fast and we strike hard. The cold will slow us down if we give it the chance. So we cannot afford to waste time or energy on anything unnecessary." "What about prisoners?" Lieutenant Kessex asked, her eyes burning with the same hunger for vengeance that filled every heart in the chamber. "The farmer lives until we find the eggs," Sithara answered after a moment of consideration. "After that, his fate will depend on what condition we find them in, if they are safe and healthy. We may show mercy, but if they have been harmed in any way, he will die slowly and painfully while we watch." The warriors hissed their approval of this judgment, and Sithara felt a grim satisfaction at their unified response. These were her people, her soldiers, her family in every way that mattered, and she knew they would follow her into the frozen depths of this alien world without hesitation or fear. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, and through the small windows of the landing bay, Sithara could see flames licking at the hull as friction heated the vessel's exterior to temperatures that would have vaporized organic matter in seconds. But the venomous shadow was built for war, and it punched through the atmospheric barrier like a predator diving toward prey. Emerging into the dark skies of New Helsinki with its systems intact and its cargo of death ready for delivery. "Touchdown in 60 seconds, the pilot announced. "I am detecting no defensive response from the settlement. They either do not see us or do not care." "They will care soon enough," Sithara replied, and she moved to take her position at the front of the landing formation. The ship settled onto the frozen ground with a gentle thump, and immediately the rear ramp began to descend, revealing a landscape that made every warrior in the bay recoil in instinctive horror. Snow fell from the black sky in thick curtains of white, driven by winds that howled across the empty plains like the screams of dying creatures. And the temperature readings on their suit displays showed numbers that would have killed an unprotected black serpent in minutes. This was a world designed by nature to destroy their kind. But the black serpents were not natural creatures anymore. They had conquered the stars and bent technology to their will, and they would not be stopped by something as simple as frozen water falling from the sky. "Move out," Sithara commanded, and she led her warriors down the ramp and into the storm. The snow crunched beneath their armored feet as they advanced across the frozen landscape, their dark forms cutting through the white curtain like shadows come to life. And despite the thermal suits that protected their bodies, Sithara could feel the cold pressing against her scales, like a physical weight trying to crush her into submission. The target dwelling was 3 kilometers from their landing site, a distance they could have covered in minutes under normal conditions. But the snow and the wind and the unfamiliar terrain slowed their progress considerably still. They pushed forward with relentless determination, their enhanced vision cutting through the storm to keep them on course. And within an hour, they had reached the edge of the human settlement. "Scanning for life signs," Kessex reported, holding up a device that pulsed with soft green light. "I am detecting one adult human in the target building, along with numerous smaller heat signatures that I cannot identify." "The eggs," Sithara breathed. And for the first time since leaving the council chamber, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. If the eggs were still generating heat, that meant they might still be alive, but eggs did not produce their own warmth. So something else must be keeping them at the proper temperature. Perhaps the human had discovered what he possessed and was attempting to ransom them back to the clan. Perhaps he was using them for some terrible experiment, or perhaps he had already killed them and was simply keeping the bodies warm for reasons that only a twisted human mind could understand. Whatever the truth was, Sithara would learn it soon enough. "Surround the building," she ordered, and her warriors flowed around the target structure like dark water encircling a stone. "I want every exit covered and every window watched. Nothing goes in or out without my permission." The dwelling was a simple structure by any standard. A rectangular building made of synthetic materials with a sloped roof designed to shed snow and a single chimney that vented warm air into the frozen night. It was the home of a farmer, just as the intelligence reports had indicated, and it showed no signs of the sophisticated security measures that a smuggler or a criminal might have installed. This human was either innocent or very clever, and Sithara would discover which one soon enough. She positioned herself at the front door with Kessex at her side, and 12 of her best warriors arranged in a perfect breaching formation behind them, while the rest of the strike force maintained their positions around the building's perimeter. "On my signal," Sithara said, raising one clawed hand in preparation. But before she could give the order to breach, something stopped her, cold something that penetrated the howling wind and the hissing snow and reached her ears with a clarity that seemed impossible under the circumstances. It was a sound, a strange, soft, rhythmic sound that rose and fell in patterns that seemed almost musical, coming from somewhere inside the building and carrying through the walls and the storm to reach her sensitive hearing. "What is that noise?" Kessex whispered, her weapon frozen in mid-raise as she too heard the inexplicable melody. Sithara did not answer immediately because she was trying to process what her ears were telling her brain, and her brain was refusing to accept the information as accurate. She knew this sound. Every black serpent knew this sound, even though none of them had heard it in generations, because it was preserved in their oldest songs and their most sacred stories and their deepest genetic memories. It was crooning, the ancient practice of singing to hatchlings in the moments after they emerged from their eggs, a tradition that had been abandoned centuries ago when their species had spread across the stars and forgotten the old ways of their volcanic homeworld. Someone inside that building was singing to hatchlings. Someone was crooning to babies that had apparently already hatched from the sacred eggs that Sithara had come to rescue, and unless her ears were deceiving her completely, the voice doing the singing was not serpentine at all. It was human. "Breach now," Sithara commanded, and her voice carried a new urgency that had nothing to do with vengeance or punishment. She needed to see what was happening inside that building. She needed to understand how a human farmer on a frozen world could possibly be doing what her ears were telling her he was doing, and she needed to know if the hatchlings of the blessed clutch were alive or dead. The door exploded inward under the combined force of 4 warriors striking it simultaneously, and Sithara surged through the opening with her weapon raised and her fangs bared, and her heart pounding with an emotion she could not name. What she found on the other side stopped her completely in her tracks, and for the first time in her long career as a warrior of the Black Serpent clan, Commander Sithara had absolutely no idea what to do next. The door crashed inward and 60 warriors poured into the dwelling with weapons raised and fangs bared, ready to tear apart anyone who stood between them and their precious eggs. What they found instead was warmth. The first thing Sithara noticed was the heat wave of delicious, life-giving warmth that washed over her scales like a blessing from the ancient spirits themselves, penetrating her thermal suit and reaching the cold-blooded flesh beneath with an intensity that made her want to curl up and sleep for 1,000 years. The human had transformed his home into something that should not have existed on this frozen world. Every surface glowed with thermal regulators that pulsed with soft orange light, and the air was thick with humidity that reminded Sthira of the volcanic vents on her homeworld, where her ancestors had first learned to walk upright. The walls were covered with heating panels that had been installed with obvious haste and amateur skill, wires running everywhere in tangled networks that violated every safety regulation she knew. And the floor was warm enough that she could feel it through the soles of her armored boots. This was not a farmhouse anymore. This was a warming chamber, built by someone who had no idea what they were doing, but who had somehow figured out exactly what was needed. And there, in the center of the room, sat the human. He was not what Sithara had expected. She had imagined a criminal, perhaps, or a smuggler with cold eyes and a calculating mind, someone who would have a weapon in his hand and threats on his lips when the warriors came for him instead. She found a tired man in a large reclining chair, his chest bare and flushed pink from the heat that filled the room, and his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the army of serpentine aliens that had just invaded his home. But it was not his face or his posture or his obvious exhaustion that stopped Sithara in her tracks. It was what lay on his chest. 47 hatchlings were draped across the human's body like a living blanket of scales and tails and tiny clawed feet, their small forms rising and falling gently with each breath he took. And their eyes were closed in the peaceful sleep of creatures who felt completely safe and protected. The babies had hatched, the sacred eggs of the blessed clutch had opened, and the hatchlings inside had emerged into the world. And somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, miraculously, they were all alive. Sithra's weapon dropped to her side as her brain struggled to process what her eyes were showing her. "Oh, thank God," the human said, and his voice was rough with exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "Are you the parents? Please tell me you are the parents, because I've been going crazy trying to figure out what to do with these little guys." The warriors stood frozen in confusion, their training completely useless in the face of a situation that none of them had ever imagined possible. "I found them in this container I bought from a freighter captain," the human continued, apparently unable to stop talking now that he had started. "And I did not know what was inside until I got it home and opened it up, and there were all these eggs just sitting there. And they were cold. They were so cold, and I could tell they were dying." He gestured at the heating equipment that covered every surface of the room with one hand while keeping the other pressed gently against the pile of sleeping hatchlings. "I sold everything I had to buy this stuff. My heating system, my furniture, my winter supplies, everything, because I read somewhere that reptile eggs need to be warm, and I figured these were probably the same. And I just could not let them die." Sithara found her voice at last, though it came out weaker than she intended. "You saved them." "I tried to save them," the human corrected. And there was fear in his eyes now as he looked at the armed warriors surrounding him. "I did not know they were going to hatch. I did not know anything about taking care of baby snake aliens. And when they came out of the eggs, they would not stop screaming, and I did not know what to do." One of the hatchlings stirred in its sleep, and immediately the human's attention shifted entirely to the small creature, his hand moving with practiced gentleness to stroke its tiny scales. "The only thing that calmed them down was this," he said, pressing the hatchling closer to his bare chest. "They like the sound of my heartbeat for some reason. It makes them feel safe, I think. And they sleep better when they can hear it." Kasix leaned close to Sithara and whispered in the ancient tongue of their people, "Commander, what should we do? This is not what we expected to find." Sithara did not answer because she was watching the human interact with the hatchlings, noting the careful way he handled them and the genuine concern that showed on his strange flat face. "I have been feeding them pre-chewed fish," the human continued, seemingly unable to stop explaining himself, "because I read that some reptile babies need their food processed by adults. And I did not know if that was true for your species, but I figured it was better to try something than let them starve." He pointed at a datapad that lay on a nearby table, its screen still glowing with the last search he had conducted. "I looked everywhere for information about how to take care of them, but the extranet had nothing useful about your people. I did not even know what species you were until I found a picture that looked similar and made some guesses." Sithara moved closer to the chair, her warriors parting before her like water before a ship. And she looked down at the sleeping hatchlings with eyes that had grown unexpectedly moist. They were beautiful. The children of the blessed clutch were perfect in every way. Their scales gleaming with health and their tiny bodies plump with the nutrition the human had somehow provided. And they slept with the utter contentment of creatures who had never known fear or cold or hunger. This human, this soft, weak, warm-blooded farmer on a frozen world, had done the impossible. He had saved 47 lives that should have been lost, using nothing but determination and kindness and a willingness to give up everything he had for creatures he did not understand. "What is your name, human?" Sithara asked, and her voice carried none of the threat or anger that she had brought with her from the stars. "Eric," he answered, watching her with wary eyes that expected violence at any moment. "Eric Lindquist. I am a potato farmer. Or I was before I spent all my money on heating equipment." "Eric Lindquist," Sithara repeated. Tasting the strange human sounds on her forked tongue, she looked at her warriors, seeing the same confusion and wonder on their faces that she felt in her own heart. And she made a decision that would change everything. "Lower your weapons," she commanded. "This human is not our enemy." The warriors obeyed immediately, though their eyes remained fixed on the strange scene before them. "What happens now?" Eric asked, and his voice trembled slightly with fear and exhaustion and the desperate hope that he might actually survive this encounter. Sithara looked at the hatchling sleeping peacefully on his chest, and she thought about everything she had believed about humans before this night. She had thought they were weak and selfish and incapable of understanding. Honor, she had thought they cared only for themselves and their own kind. She had thought that any human who came into possession of sacred eggs would try to sell them or destroy them or use them as leverage for profit. But this human had done none of those things. This human had given everything he had: his possessions, his comfort, his sleep, his very body heat to keep children alive that were not his own and that he had no obligation to protect. "What happens now?" Sithara said slowly. "Is that we need to talk about ancient laws and sacred bonds and what it means when a stranger saves a clutch." Eric blinked in confusion. But before he could ask what she meant, one of the hatchlings woke up and let out a thin cry of distress. Without thinking, he began to croon to it, the same soft melody that Sithara had heard from outside, and the hatchling settled back into peaceful sleep within seconds. Sithara watched this happen, and she felt something shift inside her that she had never expected to feel toward any human. It was respect, and perhaps, though she was not yet ready to admit it, something very close to gratitude. The warriors of the Black Serpent clan stood in silence as their commander faced the impossible situation before her, and not one of them dared to speak or move as the weight of ancient laws pressed down upon them all. Sithara had spent her entire life studying the traditions of her people, memorizing the sacred texts and the binding oaths and the unbreakable rules that governed every aspect of Black Serpent society. And she knew exactly what those traditions demanded in this moment. The human had touched sacred eggs by the oldest laws of her clan. This was a crime punishable by death, a slow and agonizing death that would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider such blasphemy. The human had witnessed a hatching. This was even worse than touching the eggs, for a hatching was considered the most sacred event in Black Serpent culture, a moment when new souls entered the universe and bonded with the warmth that would sustain them throughout their lives. No outsider had ever witnessed a hatching and lived to speak of it. The human had held the hatchlings against his bare skin. This was the greatest violation of all, for physical contact during the imprinting period was supposed to be reserved exclusively for clan members. the warmth that the hatchlings first knew would forever be associated with their family, their people, their identity as black serpents, and yet the same ancient laws that condemned the human also protected him. Because buried within the oldest texts was a tradition that Sithara had never expected to invoke. Lieutenant Keswick stepped forward and spoke the words that everyone was thinking. Commander, by the law of the clutch keeper, one who saves a clutch from certain death becomes clan bonded to those they have. Save this law was created in ancient times, when our people still lived on the homeworld, and clutches sometimes needed protection from predators or natural disasters. I know the law, Sithara replied, her voice heavy with the complexity of the situation. Then you know that it was meant for members of our own species. Keswick continued, her tone careful and diplomatic. It was never intended to apply to aliens, let alone to humans. The law does not specify species, said another voice. And everyone turned to see Elder Koreth's representatives stepping forward from the back of the group. I have studied the ancient texts more thoroughly than anyone here, and I can confirm that the law of the clutch keeper makes no mention of the savior species or origin. It states only that one who saves a clutch from death shall be bound to that clutch and to the clan that produced it, with all the rights and protections that such a bond entails. The silence that followed this pronouncement was profound. Eric Lindquist watched the serpentine aliens discuss his fate in their hissing language, understanding none of the words but reading the tension in their body language with growing fear. And his arms tightened protectively around the sleeping hatchlings on his chest. He had no idea what they were debating, but he sensed that his life hung in the balance. May I speak? He asked, his voice small in the heated room. Sithara turned to face him, and something in her expression made him brave enough to continue. I do not know what your laws say about what I did, and I do not know if I broke some rule that I should have known about. I just saw babies that were dying, and I could not let that happen. He looked down at the hatchlings, at their tiny perfect scales and their peaceful sleeping faces, and his voice grew stronger with conviction. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would sell everything I own 1,000 times over to save these little ones, because that is what you do when someone needs help, even if they are not your own species, even if you do not understand them, even if it costs you everything you have. The passion in his words carried through the room, and even the warriors who did not understand his language could hear the sincerity behind them. He speaks truth, Sithara said quietly, and her statement carried the weight of absolute certainty. I can smell it in his sweat and see it in his eyes. This human genuinely cared about our children, and he genuinely risked everything to protect them. She turned to her warriors and raised her voice so that all could hear. I am invoking the law of the clutch keeper, she announced, and the gasps that followed her words told Eric that something significant had just happened. This human saved the blessed clutch from certain death, and by the ancient traditions of our people, he is entitled to the protection and status of a clan bond. But Commander, one of the warriors protested, he is human. How can a human be bonded to the Black Serpent clan? The law does not care about species, Sithara replied firmly. It cares about actions, and this human's actions speak more loudly than any words ever could. She moved toward the chair where Eric sat surrounded by sleeping hatchlings, and she lowered herself until her eyes were level with his. Eric Lindquist, she said, speaking slowly so that he could understand. You have saved the children of our people from a death that seemed certain. You gave up everything you had to keep them warm and fed and safe, and you asked for nothing in return. Eric swallowed nervously, but held her gaze. I was just doing what was right, he said. What is right is not always what is easy, Sithara replied. And what is easy is not always what is right. You chose the difficult path because it was the correct one. And that is something we value more than you know. She reached out with one clawed hand and touched his shoulder gently. And the contact made several warriors hiss with shock at the casual intimacy of the gesture. By my authority as commander of this strike force, and by the ancient laws that govern our people, I declare you to be clutch father to the blessed clutch and clan bonded to the Black Serpent clan. No member of our people shall harm you or allow you to come to harm. And your name shall be recorded in our histories alongside the greatest heroes our species has ever known. Eric blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, but did you just say clutch father? It is the term for one who saves and protects a clutch when the natural parents cannot, Sithara explained. It is a position of great honor among our people, and it has not been granted to anyone in over 300 years. But I did not do anything special, Eric protested. I just kept them warm and fed them fish and sang to them when they cried. You sang to them, Sithara repeated. And there was wonder in her voice. The ancient crooning, how did you learn that? I found recordings on the extranet, Eric admitted. They were from some kind of historical archive, and the description said they were lullabies from your homeworld. I figure babies are babies, no matter what species. And lullabies seem to work for pretty much everyone. Sithara felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the heated room. This human had searched the vast reaches of the extranet to find songs in a language he could not understand, sung by beings who were not his own kind. And he had learned those songs and sung them to hatchlings who were strangers to him, all because he thought it might help them feel safe. Your pronunciation was terrible, she said. And for the first time since entering the dwelling, she felt something very close to amusement. But the hatchlings do not seem to mind. Eric actually smiled at that. A tired and worried smile, but a genuine one nonetheless. I was really hoping you would show up, he admitted, because I have no idea what to do next. They are getting bigger every day, and I do not know what kind of food they need, or what kind of education, or what happens when they get too big to sleep on my chest. The image of 47 full-grown Black Serpent warriors trying to pile onto one human's chest was so absurd that Sithara let out a hiss of genuine laughter. Do not worry, Clutch Father, she said. We will take care of everything from here, but I suspect the hatchlings may have opinions about being separated from you, given how strongly they seem to have imprinted on your heartbeat. As if to confirm her words, one of the sleeping hatchlings stirred and wrapped its tiny tail more tightly around Eric's wrist, making a soft sound of contentment that needed no translation. Eric looked down at the small creature with an expression of pure affection, and Sithara realized that something unprecedented had happened in this frozen farmhouse on a backwater human world. A bond had formed between species that had never trusted each other. A connection that transcended biology and culture, and all the barriers that normally kept different peoples apart. And somehow, improbably, beautifully, it had all started with one human who refused to let babies die in the cold. 3 weeks had passed since the Black Serpent clan arrived on New Helsinki with weapons drawn and vengeance in their hearts. And the galaxy had kept turning, as it always did. Indifferent to the small miracle that had occurred in a frozen farmhouse on the edge of human space, the warship Venomous shadow hung in orbit above the colony world, its dark hull gleaming against the stars as it prepared for the long journey back to the Black Serpent homeworld. And inside its warming chambers, 47 healthy hatchlings slept in heated nests that had been designed by the finest engineers the clan had ever produced. They were growing stronger every day, their scales developing the deep black sheen that marked them as members of the blessed clutch. And their eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity whenever they were awake, but they were also fractious and difficult, crying out at odd hours and refusing to settle down for sleep. And the trained caretakers who attended them were exhausted and confused by their unusual behavior. They miss him, Kessex reported to Commander Sithara during one of their daily briefings. Every time we try to put them down for sleep, they cry for him. We have tried playing recordings of his heartbeat through the chamber speakers, and it helps a little, but it is not the same as the real thing. Sithara was not surprised by this news. She had watched Eric Lindquist care for the hatchlings during the weeks of preparation before departure, and she had seen the bond that existed between them, a bond that transcended species and biology and everything that should have made it impossible. The hatchlings had imprinted on his heartbeat during those crucial first days of life, and that imprinting had created a connection that could not be easily broken or replaced. Where is the human now? Sithara asked. He is on the observation deck, Kessex replied. He has been spending most of his time there since we came aboard, watching the stars and looking sad. Sithara nodded and dismissed her lieutenant before making her way through the ship's corridors toward the observation deck. She found Eric exactly where Kessex had said he would be, standing alone before the great curved viewport that looked out upon the infinite darkness of space, his reflection ghostly and transparent against the backdrop of distant suns. He turned when he heard her approach, and his face held an expression of profound loss that made something twist uncomfortably in Sithra's chest. "Commander," he said, inclining his head in the gesture of respect that she had taught him during his time aboard the ship. "Eric," she replied, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. "You look like someone who has lost something precious." He was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I know they are not mine," he said finally. "I know they belong with your people and your clan, and that I was just a temporary caretaker until you could come for them. But I miss them, Commander, and I worry about them. And I keep thinking about whether they are sleeping well and eating enough, and if anyone is singing to them when they cry." Sithara studied his profile against the starlight, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes and the slump of his shoulders that spoke of a burden too heavy to carry. This human had given everything to save children that were not his own, and now he was being asked to give them up completely, to return to his empty farmhouse on his frozen world and pretend that none of it had ever happened. "The clan has offered you wealth and ships and anything else you might want," Sithara said. "You asked only for enough credits to repair your home. Why do you want so little when you could have so much?" "Because I did not do it for rewards," Eric answered simply. "I did it because it was the right thing to do, and taking payment for it would make it feel like a transaction instead of an act of love." Love, the word hung in the air between them, strange and powerful and utterly sincere. This human had loved the hatchlings from the moment he first saw them, loved them without reason or expectation, loved them simply because they were helpless and needed someone to care for them. Sithara had lived for over 200 years, and she had seen many things that she thought she understood. But she was beginning to realize that she had never truly understood humans at all. "The children ask for you," she said softly. "They cry out in a way that the caretakers cannot soothe, and they sleep poorly when they cannot hear your heartbeat. You have become essential to them in a way that none of us anticipated." Eric's eyes grew bright with moisture, and he turned away so that she would not see the emotion on his face. "I am a potato farmer," he said, and his voice was rough with feeling. "I grow vegetables in frozen ground on a world that does not want anything to grow. I am not a hero or a warrior or anything special, and I do not understand why any of this happened to me." "Perhaps that is exactly why it happened to you," Sithara replied. "Perhaps the universe knew that our children needed someone who would love them without conditions or expectations, someone who would see them not as sacred clutches or political symbols, but simply as babies, who needed warmth and food and songs." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "You asked me once what happens next, and I told you that we would figure it out together. I have been thinking about that question for 3 weeks now. And I believe I finally have an answer. Eric turned to face her. Hope and fear warring in his expression. The offer to join our clan was not an empty gesture, Sithara said. It is a real invitation with real meaning. You could come with us to our homeworld, Eric Lindquist, and you could be part of the Hatchlings' lives as they grow and learn and become the warriors and scholars and leaders that their bloodlines have destined them to be. But I am human, Eric protested. Your people have never trusted humans, and I would be an outsider among you for the rest of my life. You would be the clutch father of the blessed generation, Sithara corrected him. You would be a legend among our people. The warm heart who saved our children when all hope seemed lost songs will be sung of you, Eric. And stories will be told about the soft creature who held our future against his chest and sang it to sleep. Eric was silent for a long moment, processing her words. And if I choose to stay here instead? He asked. If I go back to my farm and my potatoes and my simple life? Then you will always be welcome among the Black Serpent clan, Sithara answered. Our ships will stop here whenever they pass through this sector, and the hatchlings will visit you as they grow older. And your name will still be recorded in our histories as one of the greatest heroes our people have ever known. She reached out and placed one clawed hand on his shoulder. The same gesture of connection that she had made 3 weeks ago when she first recognized what he had done. The choice is yours. Eric, you have earned that right through your actions. And no one will think less of you, no matter what you decide. Eric looked out at the stars again, at the direction of the Black Serpent homeworld, where warmth and family and a completely alien life awaited him. He thought about his farm, cold and empty, now that he had sold everything to save creatures he had never seen before. He thought about the hatchlings, their tiny scales and their peaceful faces, and the way they wrapped their tails around his fingers when they slept. And he thought about what it meant to find family in unexpected places, to form bonds that defied logic and biology and everything that the galaxy said was supposed to matter. Maybe I could come for a visit, he said slowly, just to make sure the hatchlings are settling in properly, and to teach your caretakers the songs I found on the extranet after that. We can see what happens. Sithara felt something very like joy spreading through her ancient heart. But I do need to finish the potato harvest first, Eric added. And a small smile appeared on his tired face. A farmer has responsibilities. Even one who has been adopted by a clan of space serpents. Sithara let out a hiss of genuine amusement. The Black Serpent equivalent of delighted laughter, humans, she said, shaking her head in wonder. You are absolutely insane. All of you. Perhaps, Eric agreed. But maybe that is exactly what the galaxy needs. A little insanity, a little warmth, a little willingness to love things that are different and strange and not at all what you expected. He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw something that made her believe in possibilities she had never considered before. Thank you, Commander, he said, for giving me a chance to explain, and for not killing me when you found the hatchlings on my chest, and for seeing something in me that I did not even see in myself. Thank you. Eric Lindquist, Sithara replied, for reminding my people that strength comes in many forms, and that the softest heart can sometimes hold the greatest courage. They stood together at the viewport, serpent and human, warrior and farmer, watching the stars wheel slowly past as the ship prepared for its journey home, and somewhere in the warming chambers below, 47 hatchlings slept peacefully in their heated nests, dreaming of heartbeats and lullabies and the strange soft creature who had loved them first. The Black Serpent clan had come to New Helsinki seeking vengeance. They left with something far more valuable, a new understanding of what it meant to be family, and a farmer who would one day become the most beloved figure in their entire history. The galaxy was vast and cold, and full of dangers that no species could face alone. But sometimes, in the most unexpected places, warmth could be found.